At the intersection of true crime and real estate, you'll find Crime Estate. I'm Heather.
And my name is Elena. As real estate agents and true crime junkies, we view crimes through a different lens.
So walk through the door of some of the most notorious true crimes with us and discover how sometimes the scene of the crime has its own story to tell. Well, hey, y'all. Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Crime Estate. I'm Heather. I'm joined as always by my fellow Dallas realtor, Elena, and our dear friend and commentator, Melanie. Hey, girls.
Hey, how are y'all doing?
I'm good. Well, you, in preparation for today's episode, came over early and made us the most amazing cocktails. So I'm doing real good.
It's really good.
Yeah, especially like we're recording at what? It's 11 o'clock on a
It's
weekend morning.
11:50.
11:50. Okay.
Holiday weekend.
Okay.
Cheers. And I'm really excited about this episode.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a fun one.
It sort of has everything we all love.
Definitely, for sure. So today we're headed to Cincinnati, where one man used his law degree and a loophole to become one of the richest bootleggers in America. We're talking about George Remus, bootlegger, lawyer, party king, and eventual killer. And at the center of it all, a 35-room Cincinnati mansion that was built on bourbon and betrayal.
I mean, this is right up our alley. We have parties, we have liquor, we have money, we have murder, we have mansions. I mean, this is going to be a great story.
I mean, I always like a little bit of a history story too. So this is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I wish you had given me a heads up. I would have worn my flapper costume.
Yeah. People on YouTube would love that.
There was a few years that I was a flapper every year for Halloween. Different costumes, but I just liked being a flapper and wearing the dresses and having the sequins and having a feather boa because I like a prop,
Yeah.
you know, like where you can whirl around the feather boa.
We're going to have to do a social media blitz for this one. So
Yes.
you can put that on and we'll take pictures.
Pictures of Melanie from past Halloweens. I love it.
Okay, so George Remus wasn't just any old bootlegger. He was the bootlegger. A pharmacist and lawyer by trade, he found a loophole in the Volstead Act that let him buy and sell medicinal alcohol to himself.
And we should put air quotes.
And he made over $40 million in 2 years. That's like $600 million today.
I mean, he was just writing his own check. Yeah, that's amazing. So did he essentially figure out how to break the law legally? Because this is in the Prohibition era, right? Okay.
Yep. So he actually did represent several bootleggers in court before realizing he could do it better and make a lot more money by switching sides. He called it the circle. Own the distillery, own the transport, own the pharmacy, and then pay yourself.
I mean, call him what you want, but it's pretty genius. I mean, got my MBA. I went to business school, and this is like vertical manufacturing. When you're owning every piece of the whole distribution circle, the creation. He was a business school case here.
Genius. He was determined. George was born November 13th, 1876 in Landsberg, Germany, to Frank and Marie Remus. The family immigrated to the U.S. in 1882 when George was about 5 years old. They settled in Chicago, Illinois, which had a large German immigrant community. The Remuses grew up in poverty on the near west side of Chicago. Side note, I had to verify near west side on a few sites. I thought it was a typo, thinking surely it was supposed to say George Remus grew up near the west side of Chicago, but there is actually an area known as the near west side because it's located, wait for it, just west of the city's central business district known as the Loop.
I love that. It's like in Dallas, we have So Hip, which is south of Highland Park. It's like we're just trying to be adjacent to these cool areas.
Right, yeah.
I love it. All right.
Definitely. So George's father was often unemployed and drank heavily, which left the family struggling. On the flip side, George idolized his mother, Marie, who he saw as hardworking and long-suffering. He often said that she sacrificed everything for the family.
As moms are wont to do.
True. At age 14, when his father's drinking worsened and money ran out, George quit school and began working to supplement household income. That early sense of being the man of the house helped forge his hyper-responsible, ambitious, and controlling personality, traits that would later define his empire. George quickly developed a sense of responsibility for supporting his family.
So looking at this through the psychology lens, I think all that probably really greatly contributed to who he ends up becoming, right? I think I want to delve more into that later, having to be the breadwinner, having all that responsibility early, knowing he had to be the one to bring in the money. I think that does make an impact. And we've seen a lot of that in those rags to riches stories of this time frame.
Yeah, definitely. I really like that. Let's circle back to that.
Okay.
I really like that.
Yep.
So at 14, George went to work in his uncle's pharmacy. George showed exceptional intelligence. He worked long hours for little pay, but it was there that he developed a passion for chemistry and business. He loved learning how to compound drugs and serve customers. At that time in Illinois, the path to becoming a pharmacist was through a combination of apprenticeship and practical experience. Remus was so driven that he studied late at night to pass the state pharmacy exams, earning his license at just 19, unusually young for that era.
I mean, I can only imagine how hard that would have been from him. They're like poor immigrants. He dropped out of school. But I do think it also plays into this like trade mentality of education that experience can teach you something that I think we're coming back to in our society.
Absolutely. He apparently had a photographic memory and could easily recall long chemical formulas.
Oh, well, that's helpful.
Yeah, definitely helpful. In 1899, he married Lillian Clough, the daughter of a prosperous German-American family in Chicago. Together, they had a daughter, I'm going to say Romola, Romola.
Sure.
By the 1890s, after working in his uncle's pharmacy and getting his license, Remus eventually purchased the drugstore in Chicago that his uncle had owned. The exact location isn't known, but it was on Chicago's west side where German immigrants lived and shopped.
So the real west side, not the near west side.
The real west side, yeah. Owning his own pharmacy at such a young age in his early 20s was a huge achievement, and he made the leap from worker to entrepreneur. As was the norm in drugstores at the time, he sold medicines, toiletries, household items, and liquor, which was also commonly sold as medicine for coughs, sleep aids, and nerves, which meant George was already familiar with the overlap between drugs and alcohol sales long before Prohibition.
Have you all ever used liquor for a cough before?
Hot toddies.
Of course, hot toddies.
That's right.
Yeah.
I will never forget. I was a freshman in college. I was still living at home, and I did not drink at that time. And my dad made me a very strong hot toddy. I think it was mainly bourbon and honey and like a little splash of water. I passed out on the bathroom floor. Now, probably not from the hot toddy, probably because I was really, really, really sick. But yeah, I'll never forget that. I do love a good hot toddy to this day, but mine's mainly tea with like a little bit of bourbon and honey. But yeah, good old Kentucky girl, of course.
Yeah.
We had some bourbon
That's
for
what
our
I know.
cough. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. So Remus was known to be meticulous with bookkeeping and had a gift for charming customers. He was known to always wear a suit, even when working behind the counter. Customers would later note that, according to a Chicago newspaper, that he was, quote, a young man in a hurry, and that he seemed to always be in a hurry and carried himself much more as a businessman than as a shop worker. A few years later, Remus began to develop a fascination with law and enrolled in law school, using funds that he gained by selling his drugstore. Upon receiving his law degree, he became a criminal defense attorney specializing in representing murder defendants.
That's a big career shift.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, impressive.
definitely. George Remus is credited with coining the term transitory insanity, which is now known as temporary insanity. In 1914, Remus represented William Cheney Ellis in a highly publicized murder trial when the term was first used. And I'm not going to go too much into detail on that trial because I think I might do an episode on it.
Oh,
it sounds
okay.
it sounds really interesting. So all I'm going to tell you is that the defense that would become temporary insanity was first used in the case against William Cheney Ellis.
I love that. That's a great little teaser.
Yeah. Now I'm intrigued.
By 1920, Remus was reportedly earning $50,000 a year. This was during a time when the median pay for lawyers was $1,200.
Yeah.
George became known for his flair and performances in the courtroom, known for his quick wit, storytelling, and commanding presence. He was flamboyant, always impeccably dressed, had a knack for charming jurors. He knew how to make them eat out of the palm of his hand by tearing into their emotions. It was said he could make a jury weep on command. Courtrooms became a stage, foreshadowing his over-the-top life as a bootlegger.
Okay. So I feel like this is not our first story at all where we've encountered showmen, lawyers. I mean, it seems like we're talking about that in many of our cases, but I think this is the first time where the lawyer is the primary character in our story.
Right.
Usually we reference it during a trial of who is the primary character.
When Prohibition arrived in 1920, he saw his own clients, bootleggers, making fortunes while fumbling through the law. Unlike them, Remus understood every loophole of the Volstead Act. So unlike his typical bootlegger clients, he knew the legitimate supply chain for medicinal alcohol. And unlike them, he already had the charisma, the cunning, and the connections to build something much larger.
So he knew like the mistakes they were making, and he just decided to switch sides. He was like, instead of representing you, I'm going to do it myself.
Genius.
Yeah. I mean,
So, yes, exactly. Instead of defending bootleggers, he would become one, and he did it much smarter than the rest of them. While most bootleggers scrambled to find illicit supply chains, smuggling across borders, bribing officials, or operating dangerous stills, Remus saw a loophole hidden in plain sight.
Okay. So let's hold off for a second and pause and kind of talk about the Volstead Act because I think a lot of our listeners probably don't know what that is. And that was what was the National Prohibition Act, which is the U.S. law passed in 1919 to implement the 18th Amendment, and which was, of course, the prohibition of alcohol, defined as, and I quote, intoxicating beverages. I know they intoxicate us, and setting penalties for violators. The act prohibited the manufacture, sale, transport of beverages with a more than a 0.5% alcohol, but there was like these loopholes that allowed for the private possession, consumption of lawfully acquired alcohol before the act passed, like alcohol that maybe you already owned prior to the amendment passing. And it also had permitted certain industrial uses, such as medicinal and like religious purposes. So if you're thinking about, having wine at mass, as part of communion, that was sort of one of the loopholes, and medicine, because alcohol has been and was a key component in a lot of these medicines.
So loopholes. I love it.
You got it.
Thanks, Mel, for explaining that to us. So basically, at the height of his successful law career, George Remus shocked his peers and left the courtroom behind.
Good.
While the Volstead Act allowed certain exceptions, alcohol could still be legally produced and sold for medicinal, sacramental, or industrial purposes, just like Melanie said. Physicians could prescribe whiskey, pharmacists could dispense it, and Remus, with his pharmacy background and legal expertise, realized that he was a golden ticket.
And it is sort of like his whole world collided. All of his past experiences built on one another for him to have this perfect, synergy at this point.
So true. So for years, Remus played the role of respectable husband and provider. He was a pharmacist, then a lawyer, building a stable life. But as his ambitions grew, and especially when he dove headfirst into bootlegging, his home life began to fracture. Lillian reportedly disapproved of his risky ventures, especially when he began to flaunt wealth and spend extravagantly. By the early 90s, as Remus built his liquor empire, his marriage to Lillian was essentially over.
Yeah, she saw the writing on the wall.
Definitely. But don't fret for George. Later in the same year that his marriage ended in divorce after 11 years, he married Imogene Holmes.
I mean, I don't want to say he maybe had Imogene already in the wings, but do you think he did?
Yeah.
I mean, that's quick.
I think she was his secretary or worked for him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It had been a thing. Imogene was a beautiful, ambitious divorcee, and unlike Lillian, Imogene loved the glamorous world that Remus was building. She leaned into his wild lifestyle, thrilled by wealth, attention, and parties. George and Imogene married in 1920, right as his empire was booming. For Remus, Imogene wasn't just a wife. She became a partner in this new world. The pair moved to Cincinnati, Ohio to begin the bootlegging empire and establish social credibility.
Okay, because they were in the west side of Chicago.
Yes.
Okay, so they moved from Chicago to Cincinnati.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That seems like a downgrade in cities to me.
It's not as random as you would think. And you should know this, Miss Kentucky girl, because, Southern Ohio is actually really, really close to Kentucky.
Well, yes, that's true. I mean, there's a bridge that goes over, I think it's the Cincinnati River, from Kentucky to Cincinnati. I mean, it's right there on the border.
Yeah.
So, okay, that makes sense. He really moved to get closer to the liquor, is what we're saying.
Yeah. Through research, he learned that 80% of U.S. whiskey barrels sat within 300 miles of Cincinnati.
Okay, clever. Very clever. Not as random as it seemed to me at first.
Yeah. All of his moves are super calculated. He was just a calculated guy.
Very smart.
Yeah. Okay, so George's bootlegging operation was known as the Circle, and it had 4 parts. He bought closed down distilleries so that he would be in possession of the aging whiskey barrels. He purchased pharmaceutical companies, giving him control of prescribing, air quotes, medicinal, air quotes, whiskeys. He obtained government withdrawal permits, and those gave him the legal right to remove the whiskey from the warehouses they sat in, paving the way to be able to legally sell to his legally owned pharma companies for legal sale and distribution. Finally, he formed a transportation company that provided a fleet of trucks to haul the legally obtained whiskey from the warehouses. And to take it up another notch, he hired a group of men to hijack his own trucks, hide the hooch on a farm that he bought called Death Valley, where he would store and distribute his bootleg whiskey.
Mind you, the whole circle starts with distilleries that he owns, enabling him to sell the liquor to the drug companies that he owns, that is hauled off by a trucking company that he owns. Then the trucks are hijacked by crews that he owns and hidden on a farm that he owns. I mean, this feels like a movie.
All I can see is Boardwalk Empire. Like, there are scenes of Boardwalk Empire running through my head right now.
Well, you do know that he was a character in Boardwalk.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
I have to watch that now.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yes, and bear in mind, all this is pretty much on the up and up. Sure, he was skirting and bending some of the rules, but up until the whole "still for myself to distribute illegally" part, he's pretty much above board.
Yeah. Okay. So, I hate to love the bad guy, but I sort of love the bad guy so far in this episode.
It's smart.
I mean, we can at least respect him.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, and by the way, George Remus is in Boardwalk Empire. I was pretty sure about it. And he is the successful attorney and bootlegger based out of Cincinnati. And Boardwalk Empire was an HBO series on gangsters, Prohibition, based out of Atlantic City in this era.
The quick fact check.
I know. And I don't know if you have it in the story, so I apologize. But in the show, he has this habit of referring to himself in the third person, which apparently...
I saw that. Yeah, I did not have that in the story. So thank you. Yeah.
Okay, because apparently that was based upon fact that in real life he would refer.
So he just goes around calling himself George Remus?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
George Remus.
It almost seems fake. Like, it's pretty good.
Okay.
Sorry to digress, but I thought that was good.
Yeah. So amidst all this, George acquired a mansion at 825 Hermosa Avenue in Price Hill, an affluent neighborhood west of downtown Cincinnati. The house and estate spanned the entire block between Rapid Run and West 8th, from Hermosa to Greenwich. It's reported that he bought the home for $90,000, which is equivalent to approximately $1.73 million today.
Okay.
Sounds pretty nice.
After doing some renovations, George and Imogene moved into the home known as the Marble Palace. Features of the home included 35 rooms, a grand ballroom, marble fireplaces, opulent gardens, an indoor Grecian-style pool, a statuary, banquet rooms, exhibition halls, a tennis court, horse barns, and a baseball diamond built for neighborhood youth.
A lot of times in these episodes, we call something a mansion because that might be what it's called, but oftentimes they just sound like a really nice big house. Now, this sounds like a mansion. A statuary.
The home also featured high-end finishes and collections. Local historians described expensive and ornate furniture, art, and rare books throughout. But to me, one of the most noteworthy things about the home were the parties that George and Imogene hosted there.
I love a good party.
I love a good party. We love houses that were made to have parties. And the Marble
100%.
at 825 Hermosa was one of those houses. The guest list blended Cincinnati high society with politicians, their wives, police officers, lawyers, showgirls, bankers, real estate developers, and gangsters. There were some respectable socialites who came simply because his parties were the place to be seen, and skipping them would have made you seem out of touch. The parties weren't just fun, they were strategic. They were part of Remus's public image and an influence machine. By mingling with judges, law enforcement, and politicians, Remus strengthened his protection network, projecting invincibility, and made allies in places where other bootleggers faced scrutiny and hostility.
Okay, so do you think there are parties like that today? In my head, I'm thinking Jeffrey Epstein.
Maybe. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not invited to them.
Either. Have a lot of influence, if you haven't noticed.
Yeah, I definitely think so, but I think probably the secret sauce for these parties were he had alcohol.
Yeah.
And it was prohibited at that time to have alcohol. And yet he was inviting, politicians and law enforcement. So if they want to go have a good time, they don't want to arrest because it's, what is it? It's zoning out on the right words. But basically, if they're going and hanging out and partying at these parties, then it would be wrong.
Complicit. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, to my point, though, about Jeffrey Epstein, he has these young escorts, which are illegal. That is illegal, I guess, and then he's got these politicians that are also there. I don't know.
Yeah.
That in my head is that type of party.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense for sure. So think about the message he was sending to these parties, that he was untouchable because the lawmen themselves were drinking his liquor, like Mel said. He belonged among Cincinnati's elite, and his money could blur the line between respectable society and the underworld. George and Imogene's parties were lavish and extravagant, but their most noteworthy party was their 1922 New Year's Eve party. The event featured gourmet dinners, live orchestra, a jazz band brought in from Chicago, and performances by professional divers. The men received diamond stick pins. I had to look that up. It's a decorative long pin worn vertically and used to secure a tie or a scarf. And gold watches. Women were gifted brand new 1922 Cadillacs for their drive home, and everyone found a $1,000 bill tucked under their dinner plate.
That would be over the top in today's world, can you imagine how, giving like people who come to your party $1,000 each, would be like crazy
I'm
to
sorry.
all the women. I need to have friends like that. Let's be quite honest.
Well, just to kind of drive home the fact that money was no object, he lit the cigars of guests with rolled $100 bills that he personally lit on fire.
I mean, I would like to suggest that you host that New Year's Eve party this year. It doesn't have to be a Cadillac. I would take, something a little less expensive.
$1,000.
That'd be great. Take the $1,000. I'd take the stick pin, Wow.
If any of this sounds very Gatsby-esque, that's because George Remus is widely considered the inspiration for the character Jay Gatsby in F. Scott Fitzgerald novel, The Great Gatsby. It is believed that Fitzgerald met the king of bootleggers at some point in Louisville, Kentucky, and was taken aback by his audacious personality, extravagant events, and his almost unimaginable wealth.
It was giving Gatsby vibes. So I love that he actually was maybe the
Influence.
Thank you. Yes.
Totally.
Inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But you know the expression, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. It was all about to implode for George and Imogene Remus. His operation became too big for federal officials to ignore.
I mean, he wasn't inviting the federal officials to his party. Maybe that's where he went wrong.
Yeah, there's one kink in the plan. Assistant Attorney General Mabel Walker Wildebrandt, who oversaw the prosecution of Prohibition-related crime, charged George with violating the Volstead Act, and he tasked a young FBI agent to the case. Franklin Dodge began his investigation, and he found the remote Death Valley farm where George Remus had hidden his stolen whiskey. Federal agents found thousands of gallons of liquor, an arsenal of firearms, and bookkeeping journals that named many of Remus's customers. The case went to trial, and in May of 1922, he was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. After another 1 year or so of appeals, he began to serve his time in early 1924. Imogene would often visit him in jail. She brought him meals and cleaned his jail cell. So George reportedly ordered Imogene to flirt with Franklin Dodge a little, saying, "Play up to him because he has the best chance to help me get out of jail."
Well, I mean, what could go wrong there?
I bet more than you can imagine.
Yeah, this is where it went terribly wrong. Not only did the two begin an affair, Imogene, using the power of attorney George had granted her when he went to prison, drained his bank accounts, emptied his safe deposit boxes, and sold his whiskey certificates. And the two lived lavishly off the proceeds. When word got back to George about what was happening while he was locked up, he wrote her desperate letters begging her to stop. But by that time, it was too late. Imogene filed for divorce, but not before gutting the mansion, taking possession of its valuables, leaving behind only a pair of Dodge's shoes.
That's a bitchy move right now.
Yeah, for sure. And when George was released from prison, she began showing up to divorce proceedings with Frank Dodge. George felt particularly betrayed by Imogene because she was not only his wife, but his partner in crime. Imogene was his confidant and assistant.
I'm going back through the notes on this because how long were they married? This was 1924 and they got married in 1920. So they had not been married very long.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was all over by 1927. I think further down we get into the date.
Okay.
But
okay.
7.
So, she wasn't just sitting on the sidelines. He really did use her as a business partner.
Definitely.
I mean, she knew exactly what was going on. I mean, she was a huge participant in it.
But he was only sentenced to 2 years. You would think, she would just bide away her time in this lavish mansion for 2 years.
Fell in love.
I guess.
There was no doubt that she knew exactly how they were able to live such a lifestyle, and she did not let up. She used the very system that George had exploited: property transfers, shell companies, and political favors to strip him of everything.
So she was really shrewd and cunning.
Definitely. I kept looking for an article explaining how she was scorned because she's totally woman scorned, but I couldn't find anything.
I mean, why would you think she was scorned?
Because that's really...
She's acting scorned.
She's acting scorned. Yeah, like, I'm going to deplete everything. F you, you're in prison.
Maybe
she just looked out for herself. And maybe that was why she married George, is, taking care of number one. And that was always her motivating factor.
Because she was
taking care of myself.
A divorcee. And so maybe she's moving on up. Maybe he was, I don't know. We haven't seen a picture of Dodge. Maybe he's...
Also, if she's married to Dodge, is there any sort of is she thinking she might be protected from some of her past crimes, maybe?
He could be.
Yeah, this was pretty unethical at Dodge, too.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. Well, he was released from his position.
He didn't need to work anymore. He had her money.
Exactly. On October 6, 1927, the two were to appear in divorce court proceedings. I believe it was their final divorce court proceeding. George Remus had his driver follow Imogene's cab, ridden by Imogene and Ruth, her daughter from her first marriage, into Eden Park. And in front of witnesses near the Spring House gazebo, he ordered the driver to stop, forced the cab to stop, where he confronted and shot her dead in the abdomen with a single bullet. She died almost instantly, collapsing in her daughter Ruth's lap.
I mean, shooting somebody in the stomach has the connotation of you want them to die a slow and painful death. This doesn't sound like she did, but usually that's, why people are shot in the stomach. And then in front of her daughter? It's
Yeah.
horrible.
It's awful. So Remus did not attempt to flee. He surrendered to a nearby police officer and was taken into custody without resistance. George was charged with first-degree murder. The prosecution sought the death penalty, arguing that the killing was premeditated. The prosecution had a pretty good case, arguing that George Remus had planned to intercept Imogene's cab on the way to court and shoot her in cold blood. They presented him as a jealous and angry person and rageful over her relationship with Frank Dodge. They called the taxi driver and bystander to testify they saw Remus stop the cab, confront Imogene, and fire the fatal shot. Imogene's daughter Ruth also testified about being in the car and witnessing her mother's death. Against the advice of his lawyers, George Remus chose to defend himself in court, claiming temporary insanity at the time of the shooting.
Interesting. So he came up with that, and then he decided to use it. It never goes well when you decide to represent yourself in court.
Usually. Right.
Are you foreshadowing
I'm
a little bit here?
foreshadowing just-
Okay.
But usually.
One of the things I did read about, we always, anybody who's the murderer, we're usually very against. And yet we've also spent a lot of the storytelling kind of like, kind of impressed by this man. One thing in his favor is that Franklin and Imogene had put a $15,000 hit out on George Remus that apparently the hitman thought he was going to get blindsided, and so actually told George Remus about this. So just a little bit more of, okay, yes, murder's bad, but doesn't seem like, she was the best of wives.
Murder's bad.
So George argued that Imogene and Dodge had conspired against him, selling off his assets while painting himself as a man driven to a desperate act in a state of mental collapse by Imogene's betrayal, Dodge's manipulation, and government corruption. The newspapers ate the story up, claiming that the king of bootleggers had killed his unfaithful wife in a crime of passion. But on December 8, 1927, after only 19 minutes of jury deliberation, Remus was found not guilty by reason of insanity.
19 minutes. Wow. We thought that O.J. Simpson in the 4 hours in the last episode was short. Yeah. Wow.
It's so weird thinking about his life because he really did build up to all of this. And it does seem, obviously he did not know that this was going to happen, that he was going to kill his wife. He could not have predicted this would play out like this. But he coined the temporary insanity that he ended up using almost as though he did plan it and plan to, use that eventually sometime in his life.
You never know when you're going to need a temporary insanity plea. He was just laying some groundwork.
Well, I bet at that time the jury was maybe all men.
Oh,
yeah,
certainly.
And I bet a lot of these men at that time period were like, yeah, this multimillionaire and his wife, while he's in jail, takes all of his money and has an affair. Like, I think they were probably inclined, just like us, to kind of go, yeah, she had it coming or something like that.
Well, and do you think there was any concern, given the influence he had, that maybe he would, hunt down jurors after the fact?
Could be.
Too.
This was like the mid-1920s was sort of brutally violent, at least if you take Boardwalk Empire.
So Remus was committed to the Lima State Hospital for the Criminally Insane following the verdict. He remained there for 7 months until doctors declared him sane. He was released in 1928. He lived out his later years in obscurity, dying in 1952.
So all that fame and fortune and right in the middle of everything, and then just sort of lived out his life quietly after that. Yeah. Interesting. But the house had been sold at that point? Or did he live out? Did he live back in the house?
So after Imogene's murder, the Marble Palace and other of Remus's holdings were tied up in legal battles and asset liquidations. The Hamilton County records indicate that 825 Hermosa was seized and auctioned off.
Okay.
In 1934, the home was demolished, and today the estate no longer exists in its original form. The land has been redeveloped, and the mansion itself is gone. A subdivision with modest single-family homes now stay in its place. It's kind of wild. It's kind of poetic and wild.
It is kind of weird. I did read that he did get married a third time to his assistant. He had
a strong woman.
He had a pattern.
He had a pattern. Let's be honest. Now, how do you meet women? You just meet them at work, or you hire women who you find attractive.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I like this story. I think it's really interesting. Oh, and going back to the psychology aspect of it, you already touched on it a little bit, but the way he grew up and poor, I'm assuming is probably assuming school in America for a German immigrant at that time was not easy. So he probably had the will and wanted to make himself more prosperous financially.
There's also something to be said for if you grow up, really struggling, that sometimes when you do make money, you always worry that you're never going to have it again. And there's never enough. You just want to keep, and that's fine. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I just think that's part of that. You'll talk about people that grew up in the Great Depression and didn't have food, that, sort of hoard food as they got older in age because they never knew when they might not, have it again. And I think it's, sort of along those same lines.
Yeah, totally. So right now, the Park Hill community, they still host a party. They host George Remus parties all the time. And so there's a bourbon named after him, the Remus whiskey. I think it's called something like that. But yeah.
I love that.
Interesting. Yeah. So the house, there was no crime. I mean, I was going to say there's no crime. There's a lot of crime that was happening in there. Not our typical crime.
A murder didn't happen at the house that we know of.
Right. Exactly. So would you guys live there or list it now? Like, would you, I don't know how would I word that?
Right now it's not there anymore, right?
There's houses there.
Yeah, I don't think.
Not interesting.
Yeah, a bunch of modest, small homes. I would have absolutely lived there back then. That sounded like fun.
Yeah, it sounds great. 100% would live there, would list it. I am curious. I just wonder if it fell into such a state of disrepair after the years of financial wranglings, like why it was demolished. Because what did you say, like 34?
Yeah.
So it's not that, like it's 12 years maybe after they moved in or something like that.
I'm assuming it was held up in the court system because I was 27 when he murdered her, and then 34, it was finally demolished.
I mean, I'm thinking that this was probably just such an expensive home to upkeep. This really was a rare kind of individual and if you think about it, what happened in 1929?
Great Depression, right? Yeah.
The financial Wall Street collapse. So
that makes sense.
In the 1930s, not everyone, but almost everyone in America is poor and lost all this money. So the type of person who could actually buy and maintain that lifestyle was very, very limited.
That makes sense.
Very valid point. Thank you for letting me tell the story.
Yeah, this was so interesting. And thanks for making, I need a refill. This is so good. We'll put the recipe up on our socials or something like that for everybody. This was great. Okay, well, if you guys love the podcast, please like, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review. We love hearing from you. We even love hearing from you when you have some constructive criticism. But tell us that you're listening. We love to hear that, and we will see you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Hey, y'all. Thanks for listening and being a part of our Crime Estate family.
If you're curious about today's featured crime estate, you can find additional photos and details from today's episode online at crimeestate.com or on Facebook and Instagram by following at Crime Estate Podcast.
Have a crime estate we should cover? Let us know. Shoot us an email at crimeestatepodcast@gmail.com. Until next week.